I always like to have a musical introduction when I'm going to say hello to a group. So hello, everybody. Some of you I know and some are new faces. I'm Jay Fialkov. I'm a trustee of the library, and I'm here today on behalf of the Friends of the Library. Happy to see you all and to have my friend Brian O'Donovan and his friends do whatever they want to do, which will be fine by all of us, I'm sure. I'll say thanks to some folks. We have Mark and Jess from the Needham Channel who make it sound right, and we'll end up putting it on our local television channel. Thank you. And Gay Ellen at the door. You don't want to fight your way through her if you don't have a ticket. And Margaret Pantridge is with the program committee with the Friends, and that's where I am. And every once in a while I do my share and recruit a friend from GBH where I work to come. And we're so fortunate. He really literally needs no introduction, I'm sure, to everyone who's here. But besides being, a phenomenal talent on air and musically, he's like as nice and easygoing and warm in real life as he sounds like he is on the radio, which is nice. I'll let Brian introduce all of his friends. I'll get out of the way. I'm not sure if I've forgotten to say anything, but I'll see you right again at the end, and I'm sure someone will tell me what I should have said. So again, thanks for being here, and Brian, I turn it all over to you.
The Given Note by Seamus Heaney. On the most westerly Blasket, in a dry stone hut, he got this air out of the night. Strange noises were heard by others who followed, bits of a tune coming in on loud weather, though nothing like melody. He blamed their fingers and ear as unpracticed, their fiddling easy, for he had gone alone into the island and brought back the whole thing. The house throbbed like his full violin. So whether they call it spirit music or not, I don't care. He got it out of the night, out of the wind off mid-Atlantic. Still, he maintains, from nowhere. It comes off the bow gravely, rephrases itself into the air. Beautiful, Jacqueline. The wonderful music of Jacqueline Schwab. We're going to talk with Jacqueline and meet her a little bit more extensively later on, but we're so lucky to have her here this afternoon. I'm Brian O'Donovan. Great to be with you here representing GBH and representing essentially for purposes of this afternoon, looking into the world of Irish music and literature and making it accessible in a kind of a relaxed fashion. We call this segment Words and Music, which I've always believed in. So this afternoon is kind of a little bit like, maybe it's like church, maybe our temple or wherever you go or not go. I always like to say that I was raised as a lapsed Catholic, which I continue to adhere to very strongly. But it's a wonderful combination of literature and music that we're hoping to achieve this afternoon in a very relaxed fashion. So really glad you guys are here. We've got some wonderful people for you to meet with. I started off with a poem by the wonderful Seamus Heaney, the Nobel laureate of Ireland, who died a number of years ago. He was the poet of Ireland. He has really expanded the influence of Irish poetry, and poetry generally, actually, not just Irish poetry, around the world by making it accessible. And it's that accessibility that we're celebrating here, not poetry or literature as some sort of a lofty, inaccessible, shelf-like thing that you have to pull out of a dusty drawer. It's alive and living and breathing, as you will find out, and really has an applicability to our daily lives. And in fact, in spite of, and some would say because of the darkness that life throws us, especially these days, that poetry is a salve and a balm. Nietzsche famously once said that we have art, we have music, we have poetry, so as not to die from the truth. And really, it really applies to our world today. So we're hoping to celebrate that here with you this afternoon. And you'll meet these folks, these vagabonds here on the row, individually today. But I want to start off with somebody that I have grown to know over the past few years because of his activism around live music. He comes to live music shows and believes in the power of live music, but is also very much involved in poetry. And I want you to give a big Needham welcome to Steve Ratner. So Steve, you and I met in audiences at the back room of the Burn, which is a small boutique series of live music, and we got to talking about poetry, and I was delighted to discover that you're not alone a writer, but you are in fact an activist around the written word and poetry.
Right, and about 3 years ago they appointed me as Arlington's Poet Laureate. It's interesting that many communities now have poet laureates, as well as states, and of course the National Poet Laureate. So it's a wonderful thing that a community wants to say, we want our poet, and we want he or she to somehow bring poetry into our daily life in a way that maybe we hadn't before.
So this is something like Arlington has decided to do this, and it seems to me that the position of Poet Laureate is not a kind of a vaunted, lofty position. It's really to be, as I said, an activist or an advocate for poetry and to make it accessible to a community, in fact.
Exactly. I had three sort of goals when they first appointed me. One was collaboration, so I would work with musicians and other visual artists. The idea that artists ought to be able to work together. The one was education, to get artists in the schools. For many, many years, 40 years now that I realize it, 40 years I've been a poet in residence through the State Arts Council. So I go to elementary, middle, high school, all around the state and all around New England, bringing poetry to kids. And the great poet William Stafford used to always be asked at readings, well, why do you write poetry? Why do you do this? And the kids will ask me that as well. And then Stafford came up finally, after trying all the good answers and nothing satisfied people, he came up with this answer. They'd say, well, why do you write poetry? He'd look them in the eye and say, why did you stop? And they would all act like this because we have a grandson now, and the material of poetry is part of everybody's life. Rhythm, sound, strong images, memory. But then the need for poetry, the need to take something from your life and make it clear, so clear that you can hang on to it. And whether those are the simple little moments or the most profound moments that happen to us, that's where poetry lives.
When I first met Stephen, we talked about poetry, we talked about our love of poetry, we talked about our love of Seamus Heaney, which we're going to extend here because he was such a huge force in contemporary Irish writing as well. But then I started to receive, because we were email connected, and you asked me for permission, but what was called the Red Letters Project, right?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So originally, again, the idea of delight, sticking poetry in unexpected places. I was going to do a mailing, a one-off, where some of the local poets gave me poems. We were going to send it to 1,000 families in Arlington randomly. Because my idea was, if you received a letter in the mail, you'd open it. You'd open it and read it. You wouldn't say, oh, it's poetry, you know. The people who might not browse the poetry aisle would read this. And it was 2 days, we had a committee ready to address the envelopes. 2 days before we began the project, it was the lockdown. And like all of you, we went crazy for a while. 1 week into the lockdown, I suddenly realized, oh, we needed this more than ever. So I switched it to make it an online project. And I began once a week, every Friday at noon, sending out a poem and a little introduction, a little welcoming, a little way to sort of frame the poem. And it was really very popular. The Globe wrote about us, and that, of course, then you got some exposure, and other poets began, wanting to send in poems. But then George Floyd was murdered, and then the social distress across the country, and the wars going on, and I realized I was framing it too narrowly. Originally, the poems were only poems about comfort. And now it would be poems about everything, and poets from across the country. So I'm lucky enough to be able to feature, young poets who have hardly published at all, older poets, just recently a 91-year-old man who is publishing with me his second poem ever, as well as the most esteemed poets on the planet. I've been very lucky to be able to have great poets there too. And then once a week, a poem appears in your mailbox. In fact, I asked Brian if it was okay. I even put up a sign-up sheet. If suddenly some of you think, I need a poem on Friday, put your name and email address, and I'll be tapping on your email box.
And on that subject, we will be hanging out afterwards, so you'll get a chance to talk to each of our panelists here this afternoon, and our musician as well, Jacqueline Schwab. But you can sign up for this Red Letter poem, and I really encourage it. There is a poem for the day by poets.org. Just read poetry. You know what I mean? Do not be intimidated by it, and that's a recurring theme that you will hear this afternoon. Stephen has also been involved in a memorial reading of Heaney poems each year in and around Harvard Square. Seamus Heaney lived in Harvard Square for a while. He was a visiting professor,
he was,
right?
but several times.
Several times, yes. And I would meet Seamus Heaney occasionally. I got to meet him at the Plough and Stars on Mass Ave in Harvard Square, where Irish people tend to congregate and check if they're okay with each other around a good pint of Guinness. But so you're going to read a poem. I asked you to bring a poem of Heaney's to begin with. And
yes. So I'm going to read two boat poems, one from Seamus and one from myself. So in 92, I think, I was writing for the Christian Science Monitor newspaper. I was doing an interview series, and I arranged to do an interview with Seamus, and we met and hit it off and became friends. And the book that had just come out then, if I can stand up without tripping myself with the mic, was this book called Seeing Things. And I want you to look at the photo on the cover, because when I first saw the book, I realized I'd seen this before. This is a little tiny gold artifact that's in the National Museum in Dublin. And when my wife and I went many, many years ago, I remember staring at this case and being overwhelmed by this. It's only about 9 inches big. It was discovered in the north of Ireland in a town, I think it's called Limavady. And somebody was plowing and hit what he thought was a big stone. It was like sort of covered with tar. And he dug it up and took it home to his wife's wash basin. She got very angry at him for that, and he washed it off, and it was suddenly gold. And it was a series of gold artifacts and brooches, and this little gold boat, like a little fishing curragh. So Seamus has this great poem in this book that features a boat, and then I'll read you one that I wrote about the artifact. Seamus has a series called Squarings, so this is one of the poems from Squarings. It's number 8. Squarings is a whole series of little poems in little 4 3-line stanzas, each of them. So the title is just 8. One word you might not know, Clonmacnoise, which was an old religious site in Ireland. It still is. The ruins are beautiful to visit there near the Shannon. I think that's the only thing you might not know. The annals say, when the monks at Clonmacnoise were all at prayers inside the oratory, a ship appeared above them in the air. The anchor dragged along behind so deep, it hooked itself onto the altar rails. And then, as the big hull rocked to a standstill, a crewman shinned and grappled down the rope and struggled to release it. But in vain. This man can't bear our life here and will drown, the abbot said, unless we help him. So they did. The freed ship sailed, and the man climbed back out of the marvelous as he had known it. I love the idea of he, from this magic world, visits ours, and he thinks we're in heaven. We're the mystery. And he,
the marvelous.
and he shimmies back up the rope to tell them what he saw in our world, too.
It's a really a beautiful image and a mythological image as well. There's all sorts of religiosity contained within it and spirituality, which we'll be talking about as well this afternoon. So the next one, there's a lot of imagery in a boat. A boat is has a lot of possibilities, doesn't it, Stephen?
Even the Imagine boat. I send out a poem for friends and colleagues every year, and I sent it one year to Seamus, and he sent me back a postcard with a curragh, an old photograph of the old fishing boats on it too, because it's livelihood, it's sustenance, but it's also passage. And even this little Imagine boat, whoever the craftsman was that made this little tiny replica, what was he, or maybe she, trying to preserve? And it was watching that made my poem come out.
And has so much allegorical possibility as well. How many of you have been to Ireland? Quite a few. And if you are going at any stage, this National Museum in Dublin is really worth it. For some inexplicable reason, it's often off the beaten path. Mm-hmm. You hear of the National Gallery, you hear of a lot of other things, but the National Museum has wonderful artifacts there that are really worth seeing.
And actually, historians will often say that the three great historical treasures in Ireland, the Book of Kells, the Tara Brooch, and this little hoard, the gold boat and the artifacts that they found there too.
Well worth visiting. So this next boat-themed piece, and we're going to follow it, Jacqueline, actually, with a piece called
Sitting in the Stern of a Boat.
It's no coincidence. We do our homework here. So you're going to hear a beautiful Scottish air. We'll talk to Jacqueline about it after she finishes playing, but it blends in with our boat theme here.
So here's mine called Gold Boat. It says, the Broide Hoard, County Derry. Hull, a hand's length of beaten gold. Gold straw for mast and spar, and both port and starboard, 9 bright twigs for oars. The artist's burnished craft, unearthed by a plow blade ere Limavady, after 21 centuries becalmed. Time might easily have crushed it for good, and yet, tonight the moons are cupped like my father's palm, memory in its hold, a word hoard massed like stars. Our vessel, large enough to carry a single warm breath across the tideless dark, yet small enough to ferry all the names of the dead, from the providence of our saying to the perdition of the said.
Sitting on the Stern of a Boat, and the poetry there read and written by Steve Ratner. Steve is going to be around afterwards. You can sign up for that red letter email, and I strongly suggest you do so. Next up, a great friend of mine, even though he's from the neighbouring and often rival county of Kerry. I'm from West Cork, which is like on a map here. If we imagine this is a map of Ireland, Dublin over here, Shannon, where you might fly into, Cork is down here, and Kerry is to the left of it on the map. A wonderful county. Joe is actually from an area that's very close to the borders of Cork, an area called Castle Island. Joseph Keane, give him a welcome.
Good evening, everyone. How are you?
Joseph, you have been in the Boston area almost as long as I have been, since the early 80s, right?
Yes, since 84.
84. I was here 4 years already at that stage. So
They say I just got off the boat.
I know. And welcomed into the same plough, I think we might have met where I met Seamus Heaney, actually. It was a denizen, for denizens of iniquity in there. But you have always fascinated me with a keen interest and a pursuit of Irish mythology and storytelling. Often when I do features on festivals and various other aspects of Irish life and Irish culture, especially the ancient form of it, I often call Joseph Keane up, because you have really made it your life avocation to find out more about this and to lead people through what is a very, very interesting and spiritual journey often, Joe.
Yes, sometimes I suppose I took an interest in it being a teenager growing up in County Kerry.
It was around you there, right?
Well, it was there, but there was no talk about it, in a sense. Stone circles and dolmens and alignments and these messages that people had left written in stone. But realistically, if you asked anybody what they were, they'd say, they're the home of the fairies. And that's as far as it went. So.
And there was a reason for that as well. There were cultures, you heard, if you were here at the last talk I gave, I talked a lot about the pre-Celtic occupations of Ireland. That were even back at times that they don't know who these people were. They're still discovering ancient mysteries of people who might have come from Europe, brought elements of culture to Ireland that still exist today. Newgrange, for example,
Of course, yes.
is one of the more famous monuments that was excavated only in the 70s and 80s in actual fact, but has origins that go back 3,000 years before the pyramids were built.
Yes, I suppose the first people started to arrive in Ireland maybe 9,000 years ago, after the Ice Age receded. And we had many invasions, and a lot of them would be mythic. There was 5 main invasions, I suppose, that what were written about, and the written language didn't really come in until the Christianity brought it. And I suppose the early invasions would be Kisar would have been the first. Of course, they came on boats. So the golden boat is very, very important to our culture, to anyone that came to our land, more than likely came on a boat. Cisar was said, because it was written by monks, that she was the wife of the son of Noah. Bit was his name. And they didn't last long. They came and a plague took most of them except one, and that goes into a longer story. We better not go in there, otherwise we'll go up the wrong river. And then there was the Partholan. The Numidians came. In lots of cases, it was plague that wiped them out or took them. And after the Numidians, they left the land. It wasn't for them, and they went in different directions. And then they later came back from different directions as the Firbolg and the Tuatha De Danann, which we would know better of, becoming the fairy people of Ireland. And then after the Tuatha De Danann, then we had the Celts coming from northern Spain, and then, of course, we had the visit from the Vikings, and we had the Normans. So the boat, the golden boat, is not only for the earlier people, but the idea of who came to this land and what they were doing there and what they came there for.
And what they left behind them in terms of physical monuments and structures, often pagan structures that were connected to the land and connected to agriculture. I just did my 23andMe. Who has done your, have you done your ancestry? And I was very disappointed. Nothing exotic in my background. I was like 98.8% from Cork. Jesus, I paid $100 for this. I could have told you that. I think it was 0.02% Finnish, which probably came from some Viking away back, some Randy Viking that left Kerry, I think.
There you go. Yeah.
But Joe, what you talked about there about people not talking about what was around them, and you know, there was a lot of ancient monuments and structures and dwellings which historians and archaeologists can now explain logically, but the old people had more fanciful explanations from them in the realm of magic and mythology. Fairy forts, for example.
Of course, yeah, fairy forts. The idea of the fairies, first of all, the story we're taught about the fairies is when the Tuatha De Danann fought against the Celts and the Celts came. And of course, like the Celts came in boats as well. And first they weren't welcomed. We had three kings, three brothers that could not rule together, of course. And when the Celts came, they just showed up. There was nobody protecting this land. Emergan, the great poet, came off the boat and went up to Tara, and they were saying, "We're here to take the land." They said, "We're not ready at all. You've got to go back out to sea." Do you know, and this. So the Celts agreed to go back out to sea, the Milesians, the sons of Mil, and they went back out to sea, and then they got the Tuatha De Danann got their druids to put spells on the ocean, and the waves rose, and the Milesians circled Ireland 9 times before they came in County Kerry, of course, in Ballinaskelligs, and it was when the great poet got up and he had a verse. I don't have the verse off, but he became the ocean, and he became the wind, and he became one with nature itself. And the oceans quelled, and then the Celts came and fought with the Tuatha De Danann. It was a battle that wasn't going to be won, but they made an agreement. And they made an agreement, I suppose. Well, I think they were winning the battle, and the 3 queens of Ireland fled. And those 3 queens are very important to our culture, which we weren't taught too much about, was Bamba, Eru, and Folda. And these are like the 3 old queens, having a youth, a middle, and an old. The triple goddess, the maid, the mother, the crone, beauty, and of course the crone is the hag, and you know her of the hag is of winter. The witch and the broom is the Cailleach Beara, who really is the
Very
birth of
important in
Ireland.
Irish literature as well,
yes.
and you hear it referred to in a lot of the literature. But you're talking about a feminist deity. There was a kind of a feminist divine that was very important in ancient Celtic mythology.
Yeah, very much. It was really 3 queens that ruled the 3 worlds. And of course, what's very different about, I suppose, the road that we're on these days is Roman.
Yeah.
Now, the difference between our Celtic indigenous culture is they were much, much smarter because they stopped and they looked at time. And time wasn't going straight down the road at all. The future wasn't down there and the past wasn't behind you. Otherwise, if you were on that road, you're never present. And if you were never present, there was no spirit. But to be present is to be part of this world. And that goes back into the tree of life. That goes back to the sacred center that's connected with the earth and the ancestors, and the past is down here. The present, the sacred tree sheltered all forms of life, insect, fish, mammal, plant, animal, man, and bird. And then the future comes from the stars above. That was full that they didn't really write too much about. So the
really,
3 great queens had everything to do with where we stand. What's our relationship with the earth?
And a very holistic approach to it in their religion, which is pre-Christian, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
You've got a story. The importance of story, though, is still the case in Ireland, whether it's a story about mythology, about what you talked about, which is very interesting and complex, but also stories of just what happens. Life goes on, and they often have allegories to explain in poetical form their lives around them.
Yes, of course. Well, we are blessed, I suppose. First of all, we had the oral tradition until the coming of Christianity. And we don't have a complete mythology because it wasn't all written down. Or maybe some of it was written down when the Vikings came. Some of it got destroyed, but it wasn't all complete. We don't have a creation story. We have invasions coming in golden boats.
So tell us about the story we're going to hear.
Well, Irish stories, the mythological cycle was broken down into 4 stages of stories. There would have been the mythological series cycle, there would have been the Fenian cycle, there would have been the Ulster cycle, which would have been Maeve and Cuchulainn, and then there would have been the historical cycle, which is about early kings in Ireland. And the story I'll tell you is one about Finn McCool, and the Fenia, of course, had a great leader of Finn McCool. And we'll kind of jump in. There's many, many stories, so many stories from his birth and who he was and how he returned to Tara.
One of the heroes, basically.
One of the
of Irish
great
mythology.
heroes. And I'll tell you a story about Finn. Of course, the Fíne, you really had to have many skills to become one of the Fíne. And they travelled around in groups of 9 because 3 was the sacred number. A full battalion was 27, 3 times 3 times 3.
Joey, I've seen you operate before. Feel free to stand up if you.
I might stand up.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then I'll be able to see people at the back. Well, Fíne, anyway, Fionn, to become part of them, you had to have many skills. You had to run through the woods and be able to jump over a bush carrying spears the height of yourself. You had to run faster than a deer. You couldn't break a twig. You had to run at the same speed under a bush lower than your knee. There was many, many traits. And of course, you had to remember 110 verses of poetry, which was another part of being the Fíne. So they were great warriors, and each of them had their own talent and skill. And the Fíne, they were known as the best in Ireland, not only warriors, but hunters. Wherever they went, they were always feasting. Well, one evening they were out, and they were roaming across between the Cork and Kerry border, and there wasn't a bird to be seen. And that evening they were getting hungrier and crankier and hungrier and crankier. And they looked around and says, Fionn McCool, you must know what's going on. You're the wisest man in all of Ireland. And he didn't know what was going on. And he says they were building a fire, and he went up to the top of the hill to see if he could see any animals or anything around. There was nothing, but he saw a little mud house. And over the mud house he looked, and there was a little light coming from it. And he says, we'll be okay tonight. And he says, don't put up, build a fire. We're going over to this house and see if we'll get shelter and food tonight. So they went over to this little small house. And Fionn was a big man. He sort of built down, and he knocked on the door. The door opened up. And inside, right inside, in the middle of the floor, there was a small man, not a leprechaun, they came much later. There was a small man that size, and he had hair from the top of his head down to his feet. It was covering all in front of his face and all of that. And Finn stepped in with his spear, and he says, "Hi, Derek, is there any chance you can give us food and shelter for the night? I'm Fionn, and this is the Fíne that are with me." The man pulled out his eyes. He says, "Oh, I'll give you shelter, all right, but there's something you have to do with me first." "Oh, whatever you want, you've got the Fíne here, we'll take care of it." And he says, "Oh, see that goat over in the corner?" And they looked over, and there was a small goat over in the corner. He says, "I want you to catch that goat and bind him and hang him on the hook over there for me, and I'll take care of you after that." And then he turned and he left and went out. And the lad says, "Oh, Quilta, he was the fastest, fittest one." He says, "I'll get that goat, lads. Oh, we're away with it." And he went over to try to catch the goat. And no matter what he did, he couldn't catch that goat. Bounced from wall to ceiling to floor. And all the Fíne had such a laugh at him. They were all there saying, "Quilta, you can't even catch a goat and you want to be one of the Fíne. Not a chance." Well, Gall MacMorna says, "Well, come out here and let a man at it." The big Gall, the strength of that man, he went in after it. And again, that goat bucked and bounced, and he got him, and he would be out of his arms. And one by one, the other Fíne went after the goat until they were all breathless in this little house, not able to catch the goat. And as they were all there, breathless, wondering what's going on, this incredibly beautiful woman walked in. And she walked in, royalty walked past them, and she walked over to Diarmid. And she went over to Diarmid, and she looked at them, and she says, "You had me once, and you'll never have me again." He says, "My lady, I don't know you. We have never met." "You had me once, but you'll never have me again." "But my lady, I would never forget. I am Diarmid." She says, "I know who you are." She says, "You are a beautiful looking man." She'll give him a gift. She gave him a kiss and put something like a little love mark on his forehead, which he got into fierce trouble later on in his life. And then, as she was walking back out, all the Fíne stood up in front of her, and she just looked at them one by one. "You had me once, and you'll never have me no more." And she walked out. He said, "There's some strange stuff going in here." And the little hairy man came in again. He says, "You haven't caught that goat yet." And Finn says, "Strange little man, there's some strange magic going in here today, and I want to find out what it is." He says, "That goat. What is that goat? We cannot catch him." oh, that goat is the world, and you can never bind it. Oh, and that woman, who is that beautiful young woman that I've just saw going out there? Oh, that young woman is youth, and you had her once, and you will never have her again. Oh. And who are you, old man? Who are you? I am death, and I rule you all.
Jacqueline Schwab. And as if to prove I only work with the best, Jacqueline picks up a piece called She Beag She Moor, which is an absolutely gorgeous piece of music, which is Little Fairy Hill and Big Fairy Hill. We didn't even rehearse the two things, so going together, a perfect interlude after Joseph Keane's wonderful, wonderful story. And cautionary tale, I might add, right? Didn't I tell you it's going to be like church? Well, we're moving forward. I want to introduce somebody as well that I have known for many, many years here. He's from the mid part of the country, one of the areas that Joseph Keane is talking about as well, that's full of the magic and the old sites of Ireland, the Midlands of Ireland. He's from County Westmeath, an area around Mullingar. And he has been here for many, many years as well, teaching and leading Irish studies events at Boston College. Please welcome Joseph Nugent. And Joseph and I have gotten to know each other over the years around many different topics, really interesting ones. Boston College is nothing if not an open institution that throws its doors open regularly for explorations, quite frankly, like this one, Joe. And you've been involved in those, making sure that the resources of the university, the academics of it are not exclusive. They're actually designed to encourage participation. You did the Flann O'Brien, for example, weekend, just a couple of weekends ago, right?
We did. Thanks very much, Brian. And it's really nice to be here. Yeah, Boston College is, of course, our main object. Our purpose in life is to educate the students that we have there. But we really have a mission to spread the word out beyond that. Mm-hmm. And of course, you'd all be familiar with the fact that Boston College has got, it's coming out of an Irish heritage. It's been run by the Jesuits. It's serviced the Irish people, the Irish immigrants of this area for a very long time now, and that continues. And yeah, we do. We have series of events that are open to the public, and the one that I particularly ran just 2 weeks ago was the Flann O'Brien 6th International Conference. And not everybody will know who Flann O'Brien is, but some of you will know who James Joyce is. And Flann O'Brien, you might say, grew up in his shadow and maybe wrote under his shadow. Maybe a more accessible author, maybe an even funnier author for the ordinary people. And so for that purpose, we brought 120 people from 35 different universities around the world to come and to celebrate this hilariously funny Irish author.
But Joyce is the subject today that we're going to focus on a little bit, because there is a major anniversary coming up. I don't know if it's happened already. When was it actually published? But Ulysses was actually published 100 years ago. There's a date associated with that.
There's most certainly a date associated with it, and the date is February the 2nd.
So it's already passed.
It's already passed, but February the 2nd, for a very particular reason. Joyce, rationalist though he was, anti-romanticist though he was a kind of a superstitious sort of a man. And he liked coincidences of all sorts, and even constructed his own coincidences. And he was very determined that this book, the book of his life that he spent 7 years writing, would be published on his birthday, February the 2nd in 1922. So just 100 years ago, a few weeks past. That led, I'll just say incidentally, to a number of difficulties and complexities. You can buy a copy of Ulysses, and many of you have. I expect most of you have it on your bookshelf. You can buy a copy of Ulysses for a very small amount. And that's because the original publication is out of copyright, and many people sent out facsimiles. But the fact is that Joyce at the time, determined to get the book out by the time of his birthday, was pushing and rushing the publishers and the printers. And it was being printed in France by people who didn't speak even ordinary English, never mind the complex, twisted English of James Joyce. So in fact, there's something like maybe between 20 and 30, it's thought, mistakes per page in that English. But I'm not saying that my students necessarily can tell those that think it's a complex working of James Joyce's mind, as many people do. But yes, February the 2nd it was, 1922.
And published in France, where Joyce was kind of in exile, pretty much, right? He left Ireland, spent most of his life outside of Ireland, is that correct?
He was in exile throughout his life.
Yeah.
In exile, he said, from the nets that were trying to contain him within Ireland, the nets of religion and of nationalism in particular, that he wanted to escape from. But did he ever leave Ireland? The question was put to him, will you ever return? And his answer was, did I ever leave? And the truth is that from the moment he left at the age of 21 until he died, he wrote obsessively about one single thing. He wrote about Dublin and almost nothing else. Now, we did, of course, like to believe, and he's absolutely right, that so many of his writings were about the universe. They were about the world, indeed. And that Dublin he could see as a small metropolis that could stand out, and the people within it could stand for everybody within the world. But he never escaped Dublin, that's for sure.
And it was in his blood all the way up to when he died. And there were some tragic aspects of that as well. There was the joys of Dublin, but there was the repression of Dublin, a very conservative government had taken over after independence, Joe, and the Catholic Church was allied with it very, very closely.
Indeed.
And that was a heavy weight on Joyce's shoulders.
It was, but one that he took it on as a burden and set out to write his way through that, not just on his own behalf, for the people of Ireland. In his semi-autobiographical novel, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, the voice of Stephen Dedalus is essentially the voice of him. And at 20 years of age, the young Stephen Dedalus, 19 years of age, the young Stephen Dedalus says that he was going to go out, he says, and I'm going to forge the conscience of my race in the smithy of my soul. An enormous claim, an enormous assertion that he was actually, James Joyce, was going to go and he was going to produce a real ethical conscience for the Irish people himself.
So this was absolutely very deliberately and prescribed by him. He said, I'm going to make this shot.
And these books, like Ulysses, are highly moral books. They're entertaining, they're hilarious, they're challenging, no doubt about that, but they bring you to a place that's good for you, I think you can say.
Talk about that just a little bit, because if you're like me, I have probably made, I think, about 375 attempts to read Ulysses, which means that I haven't completed it yet. But I will, I promise. I'm going to make the 376th after I finish here this afternoon. It's worth it though, Joe, right? You're saying it's absolutely worth it.
It's entirely worth it. My own small contribution to the centenary was to bring as many other people into the fold as I possibly could. And it was, of course, a year and a half ago when COVID was at its worst, and the gloom that was hanging over us there. And I thought that this might be the perfect opportunity to go and to speak to my many good friends, whom I loved very dearly, and I knew that I would love far, far more if I was able to speak with them about this grand, grand novel. And I set up a Zoom reading group. And it was, I'm going to say, hugely successful. And I'm going to say that it was the best thing that I did in COVID. And I'm going to dare to say that the people who joined me on Zoom as we read this book from beginning to end would say that it was perhaps one of the finest things they did. So many of us would have Ulysses, the reading list, on our bucket list. But the likelihood of actually getting past that 366th, was it, Brian, to the moment when you succeed is slim. You need to do it as a group. You need to do it with some guidance. But if you do it, the promise is that you will become, I'm always going to say, a better person. Now, I think we all agree. We know that Reading is good for us. It builds empathy. It gives us self-understanding. It gives understanding of those around us. It helps us to build relationships. And nobody does that as exquisitely, as powerfully as James Joyce in these 600 pages set in one single day, walking around the city of Dublin, but producing maybe the most intimate relationship with a character that you're likely to find in any piece of literature, anywhere.
And an extraordinary concept as well. He chose Leopold Bloom, Jewish, living in Dublin at that time, an extraordinary theme to take on to begin with. And there's lots of reasons for that as well. If you want to, at the end of this, I'm going to give my email address a few times, celtic@gbh.org, and please come and ask me for it, but it's simple, celtic@gbh.org, and you can send me an email. I will send you additional resources, connections to Stephen's work, connections to Joseph's work, how to read Ulysses. There are groups in town, connections to what Joe Keane does in terms of storytelling. He leads tours to Ireland. So I will gather all of that information for you, celtic@gbh.org, and I'll send you a comprehensive set of resources and links as well to Jacqueline Schwab's wonderful music, which we will hear more of. But we're going to ask Joe Nugent to read from a different work of James Joyce that you regard as kind of really emblematic of his extraordinary language, right? The rhythm and the musicality of it.
Terrifyingly emblematic. If Ulysses is a difficult book, then it is a cream bun compared to Finnegan's Wake. He spent 22 years reading this book, which is unarguably the most complex, the most difficult book written in the English language. I'm going to read a piece from the last page, which is almost the first page, because this book is physically and metaphorically, it's a circular book. The last sentence continues on to the first sentence. And we're here in the river Liffey, as it's flowing out through Dublin Bay into the sea. So the voice here is of the river. It's of the woman who is the second main character within the novel. And it is in a way the voice of James Joyce as he's looking back upon his life. And you can hear some of perhaps what's going on here. And if you don't get all the meanings of the words, that's not important. Along with Joyce, with Ulysses and with Finnegan's Wake, you listen to it. You hear the sounds of it. That's what's about. The musicality within it here. Excuse me. First we feel, then we fall, and let her reign now if she likes, gently or strongly as she likes. Anyway, let her reign, for my time has come. I done me best when I was let, thinking always, if I go, all goes. 100 cares, a tithe of troubles, and is there one who understands me? One in 1,000 of years of the nights, all me life I have been lived among them, but now they are becoming loathed to me, and I am loathing their little warm tricks, and loathing their mean cosy turns, and all the greedy gushes out to their small souls, and all the lazy leaks down over their brash bodies. How small it's all, and me letting on to myself always, and lilting on all the time. I thought you were all glittering with the noblest of carriage. You're only a bumpkin. I thought you the great in all things, in guilt and in glory. You're but a puny. Home. My people were not their sort out beyond there, so far as I can see. For all the bold and bad and bleary, they are blamed the sea hags. No, not for all our wild dances and all their wild din. I can see myself among them, Allen Uvia Plur Trabeld. How she was handsome, the wild Amasia, when she would seize to my other breast. And what is she weird, haughty Niluna, that she was snatched from my ownest hair? For 'tis they are the stormies. Ho hang, hang ho, the clash of our cries till we spring to be free. Or of olds, they says, never heed of your name. But I am loathing them that's here, and all I loathe, lunily, in me loneness, for all their faults. I am passing out. Oh, bitter ending, I'll slip away before they're up. They'll never see, nor know, nor miss me. And it's old and old, it's sad and old, it's sad and weary. I go back to you, my cold father, my cold, mad father. my cold, mad, fiery father, till the near sight of the mere size of him, the miles and miles of it moan and owning makes me seasick, salt sick, and I rush my only into your arms. I see them rising. Save me from those terrible throngs. 2 more, 1, 2, more men's more. So, Avalabel, my leaves have drifted from me, all, but one thing still, I bear it on me, to remind me of, if, so soft this morning hours. Yes, carry me along, Taddy, like you done, through the toy fair. If I seen him bearing down on me now under white spread wings, like he'd come from archangels, I sink, I die down over his feet, humbly, dumbly, only to wash up. Yes, Tid, there's where, first, we passed through grass, be hushed the bush to wish a gull, gulls, far calls, coming, far, end here, us then, Finnegan, take, Musafalty, remember me, till 1,000 thee, oops, the keys to, given, away, alone, a last, a loved, a long. The river run past even Adams from swerve of shore to bend of bay brings us by commodious speakers of recirculation back to the Hoth Castle and environs.
So we're going to go fully in a circle. Oh, wow. And I think we've got new sympathy for the French translators that were trying to get into the other Ulysses there. Oh, my goodness. Joyce was also an extraordinary singer himself, in actual fact, and loved music, the music of his time, which appears a lot in Ulysses, but more in Dubliners, actually, with each story mentioning a particular piece of music. And I want to sing a beautiful piece that Jacqueline Schwab has included on one of her albums, a gorgeous version of it. It's a song from that era, old Victorian chestnut, sentimental song that you can sing along the chorus with. It's called Love's Old Sweet Song. I should be standing like this, right? Oft in the dear dead days beyond recall, and on the world the mists began to fall. Out of the dream they rose in happy throng. Lo, to our hearts love sang an old sweet song. And in the dusk, where fell the firelight gleam, softly it wove itself into a dream. Just the song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadow softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, sad the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song. I've always loved that song for its sentimentality, and it really brings us back to an era, perhaps nostalgia for an era that we didn't even experience. But that's what Joyce does, especially in his more accessible works as well, Joe. So it's really, really great to get that insight into Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses. Joyce shared a stage at one stage with the great John McCormack, the great tenor. And in fact, he thought that he was going to be an equal to McCormack, right, Joe?
Indeed. He said that his voice was equal to McCormack's.
And you know, we're glad it kind of worked out differently. That we've got the great literature and we've got the great recordings of McCormack, including a beautiful version of Love's Old Sweet Song. But I will again connect you to the music and the works of James Joyce. One of the projects that Joe Nugent was involved, which I was fascinated with, it is an app on your phone which guides you around Joycean Dublin, right? Around Ulysses and various other ways of celebrating James Joyce. Bloomsday coming up on June 16th, by the way. It's celebrated all over the world. Here in Boston, lots of readings around. Again, I'll connect you. And with Joe Nugent and several other voices involved, I've done a piece that focuses on, for GBH, focuses on the music of James Joyce. So again, in that email, celtic@gbh.org, I'll send that as a link as well. You can find out more. But we have just we're extraordinarily lucky to have somebody with us who I was amazed was available to us and willing to do this. And that is a musician who is well known in all sorts of musical genres around the world, basically, and that's Jacqueline Schwab. You have no idea, if you don't know who she is, how lucky we are to have her. Seriously. Great to have you with us, Jacqueline. I've known Jacqueline for a long time. She's been very much involved in the English country dance scene and the folk scene generally. And over recent years, if you hear the wonderful Ken Burns documentaries, the beautiful piano playing that's on there, Jacqueline Schwab. You've worked with Ken since the early days, right?
Not quite at the beginning, but the dawn of time, really. Yeah, his Civil War, which wasn't his first film, but
it was the first film that really hit big and kind of created the Ken Burns.
I was really lucky, and he actually, I got the call because he heard the recording of my English country dance band. So who would have thunk? But
there it is. And since then, you've gone on to do, you know, a lot of the historical music that backs up Ken Burns. You know, we talk about Civil War songs. You've done a lot of that era of music. Baseball. You've done a lot of that era of music. Really, Ken Burns reflecting the musical realities of the era that he's covering in those documentaries.
Yeah.
And a lot of your music seems to be very much based on singing and songs. You love songs and play the instrumental part of them with the same emotion as if they were sung with words.
Well, I was really fortunate working with Ken in that he helped me evolve that. Mm-hmm. And he really wanted very spare, I call it making an omelet with just eggs, with very spare piano. He took away my chords, he even took away my Irish ornaments. You know, I just had to play just spare melody. And so with that, you just really get into the singing quality of a piece. And
the emotion of the piece to begin with.
Yeah, and I feel like he was a sorcerer that brought that out of me. I had been a dance pianist, and I still love playing for dance, but this is a whole different side of myself I didn't know was there.
And the other thing that is clearly in evidence here today is the free form of your playing style.
Pretty free.
You know what I mean? As opposed to dance. I mean, dance is obviously, you have to, rhythmically, the dancer and the musicians have to be in sync, so they know where the dance is going. But in your playing today, you can free yourself up and go in any direction.
I like that. I mean, I feel like you're indulging me that I can do that. but and the doors are locked. But anyway, in reading about the 19th century, I read in one account that singers might stop and cry in the middle of a piece, and I don't think they meant it as a show-off thing. It was just that that was the tenor of the times. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. I never heard. That's really wonderful. Also with you though is Edmund Robinson, the wonderful Edmund Robinson, your partner in crime, and several other endeavors as well. Edmund is also a minister, so I can say the partner in crime with safe effect. Edmund, you brought your concertina along, right?
Yep.
And I know Edmund through the Irish session scene. Has anybody seen a concertina before? It's described as an accordion after taxes. It's a beautiful, beautiful instrument. Again, from the 1800s, became very popular in Ireland. Is associated with sailors, kind of as a kind of almost a joke, you know. Da da dum 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 da da dee da da dum. But it's so much more than that. Can you give us a tune,
All right.
Edmund?
Here's another piece by the 18th century harpist Turlough O'Carolan. After he supposedly went to Italy and had a few jars with Palestrina, he came back to sounding a little bit more Italian Renaissance than Irish. So this is something called O'Carolan's Concerto.
Edmund Robinson with O'Carolan's Concerto, which, as he said, is kind of based on Baroque music, which was happening at that time in Ireland. A lot of crossover between what was the Irish traditional country music, not like the music that we hear today, but the tunes that were played by traveling harpists like Turlough O'Carolan, who was born in the 1600s and became blind from smallpox earlier on. He showed a propensity for musicianship, and his parents basically trained him as a traveling harpist, because that was a way to make money. He would travel around the country on horseback and go to the patrons and the big houses and write them tunes, and they would look after him for a few months at a time. And harping, it might surprise you to hear that harping in Ireland nearly died out towards the end of the 1700s because it was just getting old-fashioned. And a big harp festival was called in Belfast by a guy called Edward Bunting, right? Wasn't it Bunting did that? And all of the harpists that were remaining in Ireland, who were dying out rapidly, came to Belfast, and a lot of the tunes that we hear today were written down at that time. So the mind boggles to think if that had not happened, we would have lost this whole body of work. It's just been absolutely wonderful to have you guys here. We could go on and on, obviously, about everything that's happening. Joe Nugent, in terms of BC, what's coming up at BC? I know we had Mary Robinson in there last night, but Boston College has a whole Irish studies program and a Gaelic roots program that's open to the public, right?
Absolutely. The Irish Studies program is the Gaelic roots is the music element, you might say, of the programme. And I'm afraid we're coming towards the end of the semester, so
Yeah,
I don't have anything that I can promise you right now. But beginning in September, you can expect a full series of events. As it happens, due to a number of changes, the whole Irish Studies programme has been revitalised, so we're really looking forward to a very, very full series of events. The Irish Studies, I'm sure you'll give us a link actually to the people out here.
Absolutely.
And you'll find lectures, talks, very exciting people. They might be about politics, about poetry, about the arts. We've got an exhibition, for example, of Irish photography going on in the Macmullen Museum that is absolutely magnificent. If you have any interest in Ireland between 1980 and 2020, it's contained there by a man called Martin Power, maybe the most important photographer happening in England at the moment. And it's a beautiful exhibition. So lots of stuff coming up. I can't tell you the specifics, but it's all going to be out there.
Lots of great things happening. Joe, are you planning on leading any tours back to Ireland? Tell us a little bit about the spirituality tours that you lead. Small groups.
Yes, small groups, out of the way places, holy wells, stone circles, magical places, and I suppose it's a learning tour in the sense of what was their spiritual understanding. So it sort of goes into what was the Wheel of Time, or all of these old festivals that we used to celebrate. We used to have 8 festivals of the year.
One coming right up in May. May 1st is Bealtaine.
Which is a very, very important festival in the old Celtic tradition. And matter of fact, I'm going back to celebrate it. I will be at a fire at Ishnock, not too far from where Joe comes from.
Which is one of the ancient sites.
Ishnock is the mythic centre of Ireland. It's the axis mundi between the worlds. It's the centre of the great Wheel of Time. And when they marked out all these standing stones and alignments in Ireland, they marked time moving around this great centre. And as we watch that wheel move around, of course, it has equinoxes and solstices and 4 cross quarters called fire festivals. Fire was the element of transformation. So the biggest fire festival would have been Beltane or Beltinna, which is the fire of the old sun god Bel. And every fire in Ireland would have been extinguished before we cross into May Day. And the reason being, of course, is because the spiritual tradition is that you stand in the center of this wheel and we watch it move around us and not chase it. And if we watch time moving around, it has 2 halves, light and dark, day and night, seen and unseen. So it was a gateway between May Day and Halloween is right across the other side, which is the old Irish New Year. And these are the 2 gateways where the worlds collided, that the other world was open to ours, that the light met the dark or the dark met the light. It's the agricultural cycle starts. Everything is full and everything is empty. Everything is out, everything is in.
And again, I will send you some links to that tour and some more information. Joe also specializes in jewellery, actually, in Celtic jewellery. That's absolutely
Yes,
beautiful.
I took an interest in jewellery and messing with jewellery and then selling jewellery and Irish goods. And it was
And often reflecting
symbolism.
these kind of principles as well.
Yes, well, that's what got me into it in the first place, was the origins of all of these symbolisms. What were all of these symbols that they were drawing and what was the understanding and what was the meaning behind them? And usually when you'd see a lot of those Celtic designs, you will see 4 corners and 4 cross quarters. And that Celtic knot is the idea of infinity moving around in a wheel, being infinite more so than that.
It's a beautiful image. Stephen, I'm going to ask you to start to wind us down here with a poem that you wrote actually or modelled on some of the sentiments of Seamus Heaney. Tell us the origins of this poem.
I'll read you a little passage from when I interviewed Seamus, where he was talking about music and poetry, about the life of language. And I'll just read a tiny bit. He said, when I read Shakespeare or Marlowe or Hopkins or Keats or Eliot or Yeats, the extra voltage in the language, the intensity, the self-consciousness of the language, that's what I associate with poetryness. And then skipping on a little bit, he said, it's a kind of overdoing it. Enough is not enough when it comes to poetry. This extraness may be subtle and reticent, or it may be scandalous and overdone, but it is extra.
Extra indeed.
He sometimes called it over-languaging the language. And
Half is particularly interesting. It says, walk on air against your better judgment. And it really is a wonderful kind of a valediction of Seamus Heaney to all of us.
So if you saw Seamus at readings and he signed books to you, especially if there's a long line and he's not going to write very much, if he knew you, he'd write an inscription. But if not, he would just say sláinte, a greeting, health, You know, this is what I'm going to leave you with too. And I was in my back room of the house listening to the radio, and they talked about a poet dying. And I kept thinking, who could it be? And in my mind, I know who the really elder poets who it might be. And I was gobsmacked when he said Seamus Heaney. And I wrote this poem then, and then never really finished it, and then finally finished it much more recently. So it's an elegy to him, and as Brian said, is a way to get us ready to say our farewells today as well. So, Sláinte. 3 months dead, and your poem appears in the glossy mag. Below your byline, your years pried apart with a tiny black hyphen. In your honor, I crack a cold one, ragged moonlit clouds frothing atop a pint of midnight, and toast to all our fermented spirits, lush on the summer tongue, our sullen eloquence, the cold glass weeping in the palm. Because, and you'd be the first to remind me, you can no longer see, sip, taste, savor, or honor with song this starless June diminuendo. I can and do.
Great piece. Really lovely. Lovely, lovely. Give it up here for Joseph Keane, please. Edmund Robinson, Joseph Nugent, Stephen Ratner, and our wonderful pianist, Jacqueline Schwab. I'm going to finish with a poem by another of my favorite poets we haven't mentioned today, Patrick Kavanagh, who was basically kind of a contemporary of Yeats, but later than Yeats, and in between Yeats and Heaney, for all intents and purposes. And he battled with what a lot of us battle with. What is our soul? What is our bliss? What do we pursue? And he left a very impoverished life in County Monaghan in the middle of Ireland, where he grew up in the 1920s, and came to Dublin and had to make a living, and tried to make his living in a lot of different ways, and it didn't work out for him. And he always wanted to be an artist, but never could make a living. He wrote a wonderful poem that I use as a prayer of myself and a kind of a philosophy, if you will, and I want to finish with it. It's called Pegasus, which has the image built into it. So we'll leave you with this. My soul was an old horse, Patrick Kavanagh writes, offered for sale in 20 fairs. I offered him to the church. The buyers were little men who feared his unusual airs. One said, let him remain unbid in the rain and the wind and the hunger of sin, and we will get him with the winkers thrown in for nothing. Then the men of state came to see what I'd brought for sale. One minister, wondering if a new horse body would fit the tail that he'd kept out of sentiment, the relic of his own soul, said, I will graze him in lieu of his labor. I lent him for a week or more, and he came back a hurdle of bones, starved, overworked, and in despair. I nursed him on the roadside grass to shape him for another fair. I lowered my price. Down where the broken-winded spavins stand, I went with my horse, my soul. Crooked shopkeepers said he might do a season on the land, but not for high-paid work in towns. He'd do a tinker, possibly. I begged, make some offer now. A soul is a poor man's tragedy. He'll draw your dungiest carts, teach weather lore, show you shortcuts to mass. At night he'll collect bad debts from poor men's grass. But they would not. Down where the tinkers quarrel, I went with my horse, my soul. I cried, who will bid me half a crown? From their rowdy bargaining, not one turned. Soul, I said, I have hawked you through the world of church and state and meanest trade, but this night, halter off. never again will it go on. For on the south side of ditches there is grazing of the sun. And with these words he grew wings upon his back, and now I may ride him every land my imagination knew.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What a great pleasure. And for those of us who love the library, and you know, a meeting like this here today shows us all how special and important it is. It's really a community treasure. Thanks to the library. Thanks to, I'll thank again GBH for supporting Brian and all the work he does that brings so much to us. I know I've learned, you know, a valuable lesson, which is, you know, the trick to finishing Finnegan's Wake is to start on the last page, I think. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you. Anything you can do to support the library or to get involved with the Friends, nice group of people doing good work. And have a good day. And more important than the Celtics, we're really focusing on the Celtics this week. And, but it's nice to see you all, and have a nice Sunday. Bye. Brian, thank you again.